My wife, Emma, and I decided to escape the city commotion and spend a quiet weekend in the woods, nestled among the lofty pines of the Okanogan-Wenatchee National Forest. Little did we know that the tranquility we sought would be destroyed by something we couldn't understand. We arrived at the campsite on a Friday afternoon, and the air was dense with the aroma of pine needles. The Whispering Pines campground stood up to its name, with the lovely air through the trees sounding as if nature itself was whispering secrets. It was calm, and we were looking forward to a peaceful few days. We pitched our tent at the edge of the clearing, surrounded by towering pine trees that produced deep shadows as the sun fell below the horizon. The blazing campfire served as a light in the dark, while the distant rustling of leaves and hooting of owls gave a soundtrack to our evening. After a substantial supper, we lingered around the fire, snuggled in blankets, telling stories. It was all very cozy until we heard a faraway sound, like someone wandering through the underbrush. I disregarded it as a raccoon or other critter, but Emma's eyes grew with concern. She insisted she had heard whispers in the forest. I tried to dismiss it, blaming it on the wind messing with the branches. But as the night progressed, the murmurs became more apparent, and the atmosphere deepened with unnerving tension. Emma and I exchanged uneasy glances, but we laughed it off, blaming our vivid imaginations. We went to bed around midnight. The tent gave a false sense of security, with its flimsy walls providing little protection from the nature outside. The forest music continued, punctuated by twig snaps and distant calls of nocturnal critters. Like we fell asleep, the whispering became louder, like if the trees were gossiping about us. I awoke in the dark of night, soaked in cold perspiration. The tent was strangely still, and the once flickering blaze had faded to burning embers. Something felt odd. I nudged Emma awake, and we listened in the dark. The whispers had become a cacophony of whispered voices that surrounded our tent. I unzipped the tent, and the cool night air hit us. The light shed an ethereal brightness on the pine needles, but there was a strange silence. The whispers seemed to fade, leaving only the rustling of leaves. I brushed off the anxiety, convinced it was all a dream. Emma, however, was unconvinced. As we crawled back into our sleeping blankets, a new sound emerged: footsteps. Slow, unhurried, and seeming to encircle our tent. My heart raced as I strained to hear, trying to determine whether it was just the wind or something more ominous. Emma gripped my arm, her eyes wide with fright. I found the bravery to open the tent again, peering out into the pitch-black darkness. The moonlight barely shone through the deep canopy, generating weird shadows that danced among the trees. The footsteps continued, but there was no trace of who or what was producing them. With a shaky breath, I zipped the tent closed and muttered to Emma that it was most likely a nocturnal species. But deep down, I couldn't shake the impression that something was watching us, something strange, in those ancient woods. Despite the upsetting experiences, exhaustion ultimately overtook us, and we slipped back into an uneasy slumber. The next morning, we awoke to the sound of birds chirping and the sun shining through the leafy branches. The events of the night seemed to have been swallowed up by the daylight, leaving us to question our own sanity. We decided to explore the local region, hoping to alleviate our anxiety. The Whispering Pines, which were always lovely, suddenly felt like a dark secret we discovered. We went along the meandering pathways, attempting to convince ourselves that the previous night's experiences were simply the result of an overactive imagination. As the day progressed, a weird sensation of gloom pervaded the air. The voices had vanished, leaving an oppressive silence. The vivid greenery and fresh aroma of pine were overpowered by an unspoken apprehension between Emma and me. We exchanged anxious glances, unsure whether we should tell each other about our rising anxiety. Our anxiety peaked when we discovered an ancient, decaying cabin deep in the woods. The windows were damaged, and the wooden exterior showed symptoms of degradation. It resembled a relic from a bygone era, in stark contrast to the exuberant vitality of the forest surrounding it. As we approached cautiously, a cool breeze blew through the clearing, making the nearby pines tremble. The cabin door groaned on its rusted hinges and swung open slowly. It revealed a dark room, unlit by sunlight. The air inside was still, heavy with the weight of forgotten secrets. Despite our better judgment, we entered the cabin. The hardwood floor creaked under our weight, and the air appeared to thicken with each step. The silence was oppressive, interrupted only by the occasional drop of water from a leaking roof. The walls were covered with old wallpaper, flaking at the corners, representing scenes from a bygone era. As we explored further, our attention was pulled to a deteriorating rocking rocker in the corner. It rocked back and forth, as if propelled by an invisible force. My breath froze in my throat as I observed the ancient photographs scattered around the floor, people from the past staring back at us with empty expressions. Emma picked up a photograph, and her gasp cut through the silence. The image depicted a family, their eyes hidden by thick shadows. The likeness to us was uncanny, a couple with a child, their grins frozen in eternity. It felt like an unpleasant reflection of our own lives. A strong blast of wind slammed the cabin door shut, enveloping us in darkness. Panic set in as we reached for our flashlights, their dim beams exposing a shadowy figure in the corner. My heart raced as I recognized the shape. The rocking chair had become motionless, but the entity that had occupied it had vanished into the darkness. Whispers resonated around the cottage, the same quiet sounds that had plagued us the night before. The air became thick with an unseen force, smothering us as we tried to fathom the strange reality happening around us. Emma clutched to me tightly as we faced the unknown. In the faint light, the person acquired shape as a spectral form shrouded in shadow. Its eyes shone with unfathomable intensity and fixed us with a terrifying glare. The whispers became louder, forming indistinguishable phrases that echoed throughout the cabin. It felt as if the forest spirit had manifested as an evil force. We lurched backward, terrified and wanting to escape the cabin's suffocating grip. The previously stuck door swung open with unusual force, releasing us into the glaring sunlight. We gasped for air and rushed through the woods, leaving the haunting cabin and its spectral occupants behind. As we approached the edge of the whispering pines, the suffocating atmosphere dissipated, and the whispers dissolved into peaceful rustling of leaves. We sank on the woodland floor, attempting to make sense of our terrifying incident. The ancient trees appeared to wrap us in their branches, providing comfort after the harrowing encounter. We staggered back to our campground, frantically gathering our possessions with shaky hands. The once inviting woods now felt like a maze of secrets, and we couldn't shake the feeling that the thing from the cabin was lurking in the shadows, watching our every move. We left the whispering pines with a sense of urgency, the faint echoes of whispering haunting our memories. The drive back to civilization was somber, with the weight of the unexplainable meeting resting on our shoulders. The calm beauty of Washington's environment had become a terrifying tapestry of the uncanny, permanently imprinted on our consciousness. The events of that disastrous camping trip are still vividly remembered today, a terrifying reminder that certain secrets are better kept hidden. The whispering pines, once a sanctuary for nature's whispers, had revealed a darker, ethereal truth that would forever alter our vision of the unknown. The dark forests of Washington had always held a special allure for me, and I had a strong desire to experience the thrill of camping alone at night. I had heard stories about weird sounds and events, but I dismissed them as normal campfire tales. I had no idea that my journey in the woods would turn out to be a scary story in and of itself. It was a cool fall evening when I decided to go camping alone. I chose a remote location in the interior of Olympic National Forest, far from any traces of civilization. The air was dense with the aroma of pine, and wolves' distant howling rang through the trees. The setting sunlight crept through the deep canopy, creating long shadows that seemed to dance with the rustling leaves. I couldn't shake the impression that I was being observed while setting up my tent. I put it down to the innate unease of being alone in the bush, surrounded by tall trees that appeared to close in on me. I attempted to put aside my unreasonable anxieties and concentrate on the task at hand. The night fell rapidly, enveloping the forest in inky darkness. The only sources of light were the faint glow of my campfire and distant stars visible through the dense undergrowth. I sat by the fire, roasting marshmallows and enjoying the tranquility. The roaring flames provided a false sense of security by concealing the lurking shadows outside the ring of light. Around midnight, an unnerving quiet descended upon the woodland. No wind whispered through the branches, and the typical nocturnal cacophony of crickets and frogs went silent. It was as if the forest's heartbeat had stopped, and an odd tension persisted in the air. I climbed into my sleeping bag inside the tent, intending to fall off into a sound sleep. However, while I lay there, the woodland appeared to come alive with odd sounds. Twigs snapped, leaves crunched, and an owl's hooting resonated through the darkness. I disregarded them as the natural sounds of a thriving ecology, but an underlying sensation of dread persisted. Just when I was going to tell myself it was all in my brain, I heard a faraway, deep growl. It sent shivers down my spine, and I strained my ears for any sign of movement. The roar was followed by a series of guttural snarls, this time closer together. Panic gripped me as I struggled for the flashlight, my trembling hands sending intermittent beams of light through the tent canvas. Outside, in the shadows, two gleaming eyes looked at me. They belonged to a massive beast whose silhouette was faintly reminiscent of a wolf, but much larger and more terrifying. The beast's hair bristled, and its breath produced clouds of mist in the cold night air. My pulse racing in my chest, I held my flashlight as the thing circled my tent, never leaving my gaze. I was aware that I was in the domain of wild creatures, but this meeting felt unique. The creature's eyes possessed an intellect that sent shivers down my spine. The growls became louder, and I could hear a deep rumbling reverberating over the forest floor. Fear gripped me, and I contemplated whether to hide in the tent or flee. As if sensing my internal conflict, the monster immediately ceased circling. It riveted its stare on me, and time appeared to stop still. I could see moonlight glinting off its sharp teeth as it bared them in a terrifying snarl. Then, without warning, it turned and vanished into the darkness. I sat still in my tent, unsure what had just happened. The woodland remained still, as if nature itself was holding its breath. I waited before gathering the confidence to look outside. The beast was nowhere to be found, leaving only echoes of its growls in the air. With trembling hands, I managed to light a small fire, intending to keep it going until daybreak. I tried to convince myself that it was only a curious animal, but the intelligence in those eyes tormented me. Exhausted and nervous, I stayed awake the remainder of the night, listening for every rustle and crack in the darkness. As the first light of dawn crept through the woods, I rapidly packed up my campsite, my nerves tense and my senses heightened. The sunshine provided a false sense of security, but the recollection of those sparkling eyes remained. I staggered through the woodland, the formerly welcoming surroundings now throwing lengthy shadows that appeared to reach out to me. It wasn't until I got to the edge of the trees that I let out a sigh of relief. The vast space ahead felt like a haven, in stark contrast to the stifling darkness I had left behind. I promised never to go back into those woods alone, tormented by my mysterious experience with the clever, shadowy creature that lurked in the heart of Washington's forest. To this day, I can't shake the notion that the forest contains mysteries beyond our comprehension. Whether it was a fabrication of my imagination or a monster unknown to science, the terrifying experience remains as a constant reminder that, in the immense expanse of nature, one is never truly alone. This occurred a few years ago when I chose to go camping alone in the immense wilderness of Washington. Now, I've always been a bit of an outdoorsman, you know, but what I went through that night felt like something out of a horror film. It was early October, and the air was crisp with the aroma of pine as I set up camp near Mount Rainier. The sun was setting, sending long shadows across the towering evergreens. The sky was a wash of purples and pinks that faded into darkness. I had chosen a location near a peaceful lake, believing it would be the ideal escape from the rush and bustle of city life. My tent provided a basic shelter from the approaching night. I had a little campfire going, and its warm warmth danced across the surrounding trees. The only sounds were rustling leaves and the odd hoot of an owl. It felt like I was the only soul for miles, and for a while that solitude was just what I needed. As the night fell, I sat there, staring into the flames and lost myself in the swirling embers. That's when I heard a distant sound, like a whisper carried by the wind. At first, I dismissed it as my imagination playing tricks on me, but it persisted, becoming louder and more definite. I strained my ears to make out the words. It felt as if someone was calling out my name from the darkness, but their voice was twisted and distorted. The hairs on the back of my neck sprang up, and a chill rushed down my spine. I convinced myself that it was only the wind reverberating through the ancient trees. I decided to go for a walk around the lake to relieve my anxiety. The moon had risen, sending an eerie glow across the water's surface. The forest was alive with shadows, and the snap of a twig beneath my feet made me jump. The whispers continued, becoming louder with every step I went. I got to the opposite side of the lake and spotted a shabby, abandoned cabin. It appeared to have been abandoned for years, with smashed windows and rusted hinges. The whispers seemed to be coming from within, so I approached despite my better judgment. I pulled the door open, and the hinges groaned in protest. The interior was dark and musty. I hesitated for a second, my senses screaming at me to turn back, but curiosity overcame me. The whispers suddenly appeared to have a source, a ragged old journal on a dusty table. When I opened it, the faint light from my flashlight revealed pages of enigmatic symbols and disjointed sentences. The more I read, the more dread swept over me. It described an ancient curse in which fallen souls were compelled to wander the woods in search of redemption. My heart raced as I attempted to make sense of the words. The notebook included a method for appeasing the restless spirits. I couldn't shake the impression that the whispers were becoming louder and more urgent. I came across a crude map that appeared to head farther into the woods. Against my better judgment, I chose to follow the map. The woods pressed in on me, their branches making spooky shapes in the moonlight. The whispers directed me, their incoherent words ringing through the darkness. I felt like a pawn in some unearthly game, dragged into a domain where the line between living and dead blurred. As I walked deeper into the forest, the terrain got more alien. The once familiar routes were twisted and deformed. The whispers were no longer just sounds, they were a cacophony of agonized cries and strange laughter. My beam flickered, revealing short glimpses of dark people dancing just beyond my field of vision. Fear gripped me, but a peculiar urge propelled me forward. The chart took me to a clearing where a circle of ancient stones stood silently, witnessing the passage of time. In the center, a gnarled tree stood, its branches extending like skeletal fingers. I came across a weathered tome laying at the base of the tree. It explained the process in horrifying detail, including a blood sacrifice, a chant to please the spirits, and a pledge to break the spell that chained them. The words appeared to crawl off the pages, and a voice in my head encouraged me to finish the ritual. The voices intensified around me, reaching a fever pitch. I hesitated, my reasoning mind screaming for me to turn back. But something primordial, primeval, drove me forward. With shaky hands, I cut my palm, allowing blood to fall over the gnarled tree's roots. The world appeared to change when the first drop touched down. The whispers became screams, and the shadows merged into ethereal figures. I felt a chilling air, like if 1,000 unseen eyes were on me. The air crackled with energy, and for a brief moment I saw faces in the shadows, tortured souls caught between realms. Suddenly, everything was silent. The whispering stopped, the shadows moved away, and the ancient stones stood in solemn silence. I stood there, panting and dazed, my head reeling from the bizarre event. It felt as if I had peered into the unknown and touched the curtain that separates the living from the dead. I staggered back to camp, the weight of the night's events bearing down on me. The whispering had vanished, leaving an unnerving quiet. My mind was filled with mixed emotions as I packed up my possessions. As I left the clearing, I looked back at the gnarled tree and the ancient stones, wondering if I had actually broken the curse or had simply been ensnared in its web. The trip back to civilization was a haze. The trees appeared to close in on me, leaving shadows at the fringe of my vision. The murmurs, though gone, reverberated in my thoughts like a haunting melody. I couldn't shake the impression that something had followed me out of the trees, something that remained on the edge of my perception. I still cannot describe what happened that night. Was it a delusion caused by weariness and fear? Or did I really come across an old curse, a region where the spirits of the past mixed with the living? The border between reality and the supernatural had become blurred, leaving me with a lasting sensation of disquiet that time has yet to dispel. So, if you ever find yourself camping alone in the midnight depths of Washington, be aware of the whispers in the evergreen shadows. The ancient trees contain secrets, and some stories are best kept undiscovered. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future videos. Don't forget to like and comment below. See you in the future video.